The $3.2 million villa purchase notification hit my son's phone at exactly 10:47 a.m. By noon, my phone was buzzing like an angry hornet. By evening, I was the most popular woman in Connecticut, and it only took destroying my family's financial expectations to make it happen. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me paint you the picture. 3 days ago was March 15th, my 64th birthday. Same day it's been for 64 years running. But according to my son David and his darling wife Emily, it somehow managed to sneak up on them again this year. What a coincidence that it happened to fall right during their annual spring getaway with David's mother-in-law, Maggie Warren, whose birthday conveniently lands on March 12th. Now, I'm not stupid. I figured out this little dance about 5 years ago. But this year, instead of my usual routine of subtle hints and not-so-subtle guilt trips, I decided to try something different. I said absolutely nothing, didn't mention my birthday once, didn't send those pathetic little reminder texts about having the weekend free, just smiled and waved when they packed their bags for their spa weekend in Vermont. The moment their car disappeared down my driveway, I called my real estate agent, Lisa Carter. I said, "Find me the most beautiful waterfront property you can locate within 50 miles. Money is no object." She thought I was joking. 4 hours later, when we stood in the marble foyer of a stunning contemporary villa overlooking Long Island Sound, she realized I wasn't. The place had everything: floor-to-ceiling windows, a gourmet kitchen that probably cost more than most people's cars, a master suite with a fireplace, and a deck that made you feel like you were floating above the water. It's $3.2 million. Mrs. Anderson, Lisa Carter said carefully, like she was delivering bad news. "I'll take it. Don't you want to think about it? Maybe discuss it with your family." I almost laughed at that. When was the last time my family discussed anything with me? Lisa Carter, I'm 64 years old, and I've been thinking for most of them. Why are the funds tomorrow? That was Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, the deed was in my name. By Thursday morning, I was posting photos on every social media platform I could remember the passwords to. The living room with its sweeping ocean views. The kitchen island where I'd arranged a small celebration for one. The deck where I'd enjoyed my first solo birthday dinner in decades, complete with champagne and takeout from the most expensive restaurant in the area. The caption was simple: birthday celebrations at my new home. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give yourself. And that's when my phone started ringing. David was first, of course. My caller ID showed his name just 5 minutes after the bank alert would have hit his phone. See, David had been watching my finances for years, ever since Robert Anderson Sr. passed. Not officially, you understand, but he'd made himself a joint account holder for emergencies and set up alerts for any significant transactions. It was his way of keeping tabs on Mom, making sure I wasn't making any foolish decisions with my money. How thoughtful of him. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came from Emily at 11:15, then Maggie Warren herself at 11:43. Then David again several times throughout the afternoon. By 2 p.m., I had 17 missed calls and text messages ranging from concern to confusion to barely controlled panic. My personal favorite came from Emily. "Mom Anderson, we're worried about you. This isn't like you. Please call us back so we know you're okay." Isn't like me. Lady, you have no idea what I'm like. You've just been dealing with the version of me that bends over backward to accommodate everyone else's convenience. Today you're meeting Carol Anderson, property owner and woman of independent means. I spent the afternoon unpacking the few boxes I'd brought from my old house. Personal items, mostly photo albums, my grandmother's china, the quilt my mother made for my wedding. As I arranged my new life around me, I couldn't help but smile every time the phone rang. 23. Missed calls by dinner time. The messages were getting increasingly desperate. But here's what they didn't know yet. What none of them had bothered to ask about in the 5 years since Robert Sr. died. Aunt Grace's inheritance. Sweet, unmarried Aunt Grace, who lived quietly in her Boston brownstone and collected vintage jewelry. The same Aunt Grace that David and Emily had met exactly twice in all their years of marriage and couldn't be bothered to attend her funeral last September. Aunt Grace, who left her entire estate to her dear niece Carol, the only family member who ever took the time to visit $7.3 million to be exact. After taxes and fees, I walked away with enough money to do exactly what I wanted for the first time in my adult life. And what I wanted was to stop being invisible in my own family. I poured myself a glass of wine from my new wine fridge and sat on my new deck, watching the sun set over water that actually belonged to me now. The phone was still buzzing, but I'd turned off the sound. Tomorrow would bring conversations, explanations, and probably some very uncomfortable family dynamics. Tonight was mine. For 6 years, my birthday had been treated like a scheduling inconvenience. Not officially, you understand. There was always an excuse, always something that just happened to come up. And wasn't it just terrible timing that it had to conflict with my special day year 1 was understandable. Maggie Warren had fallen and broken her hip just 3 days before my birthday. David and Emily needed to rush to Vermont to help her get settled at home. Family emergency couldn't be avoided. We'd celebrate when they got back, except we never did. By the time they returned, it was Easter preparations, then spring cleaning, then suddenly summer, and my birthday had simply been absorbed into the past. Year 2. Maggie had a cardiac episode that turned out to be anxiety and too much caffeine. But you don't know that when you get the panicked phone call, do you? Off. They went to Vermont, leaving me with a grocery store cake and a promise to make it up to me soon. Years 3 and 4 followed the same pattern. Different emergencies, same timing, same result. Me sitting alone on March 15th, pretending it didn't hurt, that my only child had once again chosen his mother-in-law's manufactured crisis over his own mother's birthday. But it was year 5 that opened my eyes to the truth. I'd driven to the grocery store that afternoon, feeling sorry for myself and planning another solo celebration when I saw them. David, Emily, and Maggie Warren laughing over lunch at the new bistro downtown. This was the day after my birthday, mind you. The same day I'd received a hasty text about Maggie being too unwell for visitors after her latest health scare. She looked remarkably healthy for someone who'd supposedly been bedridden with vertigo. Healthy enough to be raising a champagne toast. Anyway, I sat in my car in that parking lot for 20 minutes watching my son celebrate someone else's mother, while his own had spent the previous day wondering if she'd done something wrong, something to deserve being forgotten year after year. That's when I understood this wasn't a series of unfortunate coincidences. This was a choice. Maggie Warren had decided that the second week of March belonged to her, and my son had decided that keeping his wife happy was more important than keeping his mother from feeling like a stranger in her own family. So this year, when March rolled around, and I started seeing the familiar signs, the carefully casual mentions of Maggie not feeling well, and maybe we should plan something for later in the month, I made a choice too. I chose silence. Instead of my usual campaign of gentle reminders and hopeful suggestions, I said nothing. When Emily mentioned they were thinking of visiting Maggie that weekend, I just smiled and said, "How nice for you." When David called to check if I had anything important planned for the 15th, I told him I was keeping my schedule flexible. They left Friday afternoon with guilty expressions and promises to call. I waved goodbye from my porch and immediately called Lisa Carter, my real estate agent. Now sitting in my new villa with my feet up on furniture that had never seen the inside of a family gathering I wasn't invited to, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. They'd trained me so well to be invisible that they'd forgotten to pay attention when I actually disappeared. My phone lit up with another call. David for the fourth time this hour. This time, I answered. Hello, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady and pleasant. Mom, thank God. Where are you? What's going on? Lisa from Coastal Realty called and said you bought a house, a $3.2 million house. I did indeed. It's lovely, David. Waterfront property just like I always wanted. There was silence on the other end. Then, Mom, are you feeling all right? This is very unlike you. Unlike me. There was that phrase again, as if I was some predictable little mouse who couldn't possibly make a decision without committee approval. I'm feeling wonderful, actually. The best I've felt in years. How's Maggie's birthday celebration going? Another pause. It's fine, but Mom, we need to talk about this house purchase. This is a major financial decision. You should have consulted with us first. Should I? Why? Because you're not thinking clearly. You don't just buy a $3.2 million house on impulse. I walked to my new windows and looked out at the water. A sailboat was gliding past its white sails, catching the late afternoon sun. Who says it was an impulse? Mom, you can't afford this. Dad's life insurance was comfortable, but not $3.2 million comfortable. What were you thinking? And there it was. The assumption that had driven so much of our relationship over the past few years. David had decided that I was financially fragile, emotionally fragile, probably mentally fragile too. A woman who needed to be managed and protected from her own poor judgment. David, I said softly, there are quite a few things about my financial situation that you don't know. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the helpless widow you've been treating me like, and this conversation is far from over. But right now, I have a new house to enjoy and a birthday to celebrate. Mom, wait! I hung up. The phone started ringing again immediately. I turned it off and poured myself another glass of wine. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations, but tonight was still mine. The inheritance that changed everything had been sitting in my bank account for 6 months before I even told David that Aunt Grace had died. I know how that sounds. What kind of person doesn't mention that a relative has passed away? But here's the thing about Aunt Grace. To my family, she barely existed. David had met her twice in his 38 years. Emily had shaken her hand at our wedding and promptly forgotten her name. When I'd mentioned her in conversation, I'd get polite nods and vacant expressions. Grace was my father's sister, a woman who'd chosen career over marriage back when that was still considered scandalous. She'd worked her way up from secretary to vice president at a Boston insurance company, bought her brownstone in the 1980s when Back Bay was still affordable, and spent 40 years making quiet, intelligent investments. I was the only family member who visited her regularly. Every other month, I'd drive to Boston and we'd spend the weekend together. We'd go to museums, try new restaurants, walk through the public garden. She'd tell me about her travels, her art collection, her complicated relationship with our father, who'd never quite forgiven her for refusing to settle down properly. Grace was sharp, funny, and completely unapologetic about living life on her own terms. Everything I'd been raised to think women shouldn't be. When she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last May, I was the one who sat with her through chemotherapy appointments, the one who helped her organize her affairs when it became clear the treatments weren't working, the one who held her hand when she died on a quiet Tuesday morning in September. David and Emily sent flowers to the funeral. They were at a wine-tasting weekend in Napa and couldn't possibly change their plans. After the service, Grace's lawyer, Thomas Bennett, asked me to stay behind. Grace left very specific instructions about her estate, he said, handing me a sealed envelope. She wanted you to read this privately. Inside was a letter in Grace's precise handwriting. Dearest Carol, if you're reading this, I'm gone, And you're probably sitting in Thomas' office trying not to cry in front of a stranger. Stop it. I lived exactly the life I wanted to live, and I have no regrets. What you need to know is this. I've left you everything. The house, the investments, the art collection, all of it. Not because you're my only living relative, but because you're the only one who ever saw me as a person rather than an obligation or an embarrassment. I've been watching your family dynamics for years, and I need you to understand something. That son of yours loves you, but he's been programmed by that wife and her mother to see you as a burden to be managed rather than a woman to be respected. They've convinced him that you're fragile, that you need their protection, that you can't be trusted to make your own decisions. It's a subtle form of control, and I've seen it destroy too many women our age. They make you doubt your own judgment, then swoop in to help by taking over your life bit by bit. Don't let them do it to you, Carol. You're stronger and smarter than they've allowed you to be. Use this inheritance to remember who you were before you became someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's responsibility. Live boldly. Make them remember that you're not just David's aging mother. You're Carol Anderson, and you deserve better than being an afterthought in your own family. The numbers Thomas Bennett showed me afterward were staggering. Grace's brownstone was worth $1.8 million. Her investment portfolio had grown to $4.2 million. The art collection she'd assembled over decades was appraised at $1.3 million. After taxes and estate fees, I was inheriting just over $7.3 million. I sat in Thomas' office for an hour, staring at the paperwork and thinking about Grace's letter. She was right about David and Emily. Over the past few years, they'd positioned themselves as my caretakers, making decisions about what was best for Mom, without ever asking what I actually wanted. When Robert Sr. died, David had immediately insisted on becoming a joint account holder for emergencies. He'd convinced me to switch to a simpler cell phone plan because the smartphone was too confusing for someone my age. He'd taken over handling my investments because financial planning is complicated and stressful. Gradually, I'd stopped making decisions and started accepting their suggestions. It was easier than arguing, and I told myself they meant well. But Grace's inheritance changed everything. For the first time in decades, I had the financial power to make choices without anyone's approval. The question was, what did I want to do with it? I kept the inheritance secret for months, watching my family's behavior with new eyes. The condescending smiles when I mentioned wanting to travel. The way Emily would exchange glances with David whenever I expressed an opinion about anything more significant than dinner plans. The assumption that I'd always be available to babysit, attend their events, and revolve my schedule around their convenience. And then came this March with the familiar pattern of my birthday being sacrificed to Maggie Warren's latest drama. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to stop being invisible. The villa purchase was just the beginning. A statement that Carol Anderson was no longer accepting a supporting role in her own life. David's panicked phone calls and Emily's worried texts were proof that the message had been received loud and clear, but they had no idea what else was coming. Grace's brownstone was still sitting in my portfolio, along with several investment properties I hadn't mentioned. The art collection was in storage waiting for me to decide where to display it, and the remaining $4 million was earning interest while I planned the next phase of my newly independent life. My phone buzzed with yet another text from David. "Mom, we're coming home early. We need to talk about this house situation. Don't make any more major decisions until we get there." I smiled and typed back, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." But I didn't mention that I was meeting with a financial advisor tomorrow to discuss expanding my property portfolio, or that I'd made appointments with 3 different travel agents to plan the European tour I'd been dreaming about for years. Some surprises were worth waiting for. David arrived at my new villa early Saturday morning, a full day and a half early from his Vermont getaway. He stood on my new front porch, looking like a man who'd driven through the night, which, judging by his wrinkled clothes and bleary eyes, he probably had. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. Come in. I'll make coffee." He followed me through the marble foyer into the kitchen, his eyes darting around like he was cataloging evidence of my mental breakdown. I busied myself with the coffee maker, a gleaming stainless steel machine that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just buy a $3.2 million house without discussing it with anyone. What were you thinking?" I measured coffee grounds carefully, taking my time. I was thinking that I'm a grown woman with my own money who wanted to buy a house. "Would you like cream with your coffee?" "Don't be flippant. This is serious. Do you have any idea what kind of financial commitment you've made? The property taxes alone on this place will be astronomical." "About $32,000 annually," I said calmly. "Already budgeted for." David stared at me. "How could you possibly budget for that? Dad's life insurance was $400,000. Even with your savings and Social Security, you don't have this kind of money." And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. My dear son had been so busy managing my finances from his perspective that he'd never bothered to learn what my actual financial situation was. "David, when was the last time you looked at my bank statements? Actually looked, not just monitored for unusual activity." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "I check for any large withdrawals or suspicious transactions to protect you from scams or poor decisions." To protect me? How thoughtful. I poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed him one. "What you've been doing is monitoring my spending without understanding my income." "What's that supposed to mean?" I sat down at the kitchen island, gesturing for him to join me. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Long Island Sound sparkled in the morning sun, a perfect day for uncomfortable conversations. "It means that for the past 6 months, you've been treating me like a fixed-income senior citizen who needs to be protected from her own financial impulses. What you didn't know is that I inherited $7.3 million from Aunt Grace." David's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "What Aunt Grace passed away in September. She left me everything." "That's impossible. Aunt Grace she was nobody." "She worked for an insurance company. She was vice president of that insurance company for 20 years. She also owned prime real estate in Boston and had a very impressive investment portfolio. But you wouldn't know that because you never bothered to get to know her." David set his mug down with shaking hands. $7 million, and you didn't tell me? Should I have? You've spent the last 5 years convincing me that I'm not capable of making my own financial decisions. Why would I consult with someone who thinks I need supervision to buy groceries? That's not, I never said that. You didn't have to say it, David. You've been treating me like an incompetent child since your father died. Joint bank accounts so you can monitor my spending. Simplified phone plans because technology is too confusing for someone my age. Investment management because financial planning is too stressful for me. His face was flushing now the way it used to when he was caught in a lie as a teenager. I was trying to help. Emily said that seniors often make poor financial decisions. That family should step in before I spent my own money on things I wanted instead of things you approved of. Mom, that's not fair. That's not, we've never tried to control your spending. I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. David, you monitoring my bank accounts and questioning every purchase over $500 is literally the definition of controlling my spending. We sat in silence for several minutes. David stared out at the water, processing this new information. I sipped my coffee and waited. After 38 years of being his mother, I knew when to push and when to let him work through things on his own. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you tell me about Aunt Grace? Because I wanted to see how you'd react to me making an independent decision. And your reaction has been exactly what I expected. Panic, anger, and the assumption that I'm not capable of managing my own life. "I'm not angry," he said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "I'm concerned. This house, it's not you, Mom. It's too big, too expensive, too flashy." "Too flashy for what?" "For a widowed senior citizen who should be grateful for whatever attention her family deigns to give her." "That's not what I meant, isn't it? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, David? What I was dreaming about or planning for my future? When did you last treat me like a person with my own desires instead of a responsibility to be managed?" He was quiet for a long time. When he finally looked at me, there was something different in his expression. Not anger anymore, but something that might have been recognition. "I thought I was protecting you from what? From living my own life. From making mistakes, from being taken advantage of, from the world changing too fast around you." I reached across the island and covered his hand with mine. "Sweetheart, I raised you, managed your father's business affairs for 30 years, and navigated my way through becoming a widow. I think I can handle buying a house." David nodded slowly. "Where's Emily? Doesn't she want to see this place?" I smiled, but it wasn't entirely kind. "Emily is back in Vermont with Maggie extending their stay. Apparently, my house purchase is exactly the kind of erratic behavior that Maggie warned her about. She thinks I might be having some sort of breakdown." "Are you?" "If finally standing up for myself constitutes a breakdown, then yes, I suppose I am. The question is, are you going to support me, or are you going to keep treating me like a problem that needs solving?" David looked around my new kitchen, taking in the expensive appliances, the marble countertops, the view that probably cost more per square foot than his entire house. "This is really what you want. This is really what I want." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess we need to figure out how to make this work." It wasn't the ringing endorsement I'd hoped for, but it was a start. And for the first time since he'd arrived, David looked like my son, instead of a financial advisor delivering bad news. That afternoon, we sat on the deck talking about things we hadn't discussed in years. My dreams for retirement, his worries about his own future, the ways we'd both changed since Robert Sr. died. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in months. But I knew the real test was still coming. Emily and Maggie would be back soon, and they weren't going to accept this new version of me nearly as easily as David was starting to. By Sunday evening, my phone had become a war zone of family drama. Word of my villa purchase had spread through our extended family like wildfire, and everyone had opinions about what it meant, what I should do about it, and most importantly, what was wrong with me. My sister Susan called first. "Carol, I heard about your house. Are you having some kind of midlife crisis?" "I'm 64, Susan. If I'm having a midlife crisis, I plan to live to be 128. This isn't funny. David is worried sick. Emily is beside herself, and Maggie thinks you might need some kind of intervention." "Maggie thinks..." "Of course she does." Maggie Warren had opinions about everything and everyone, and somehow her thoughts had become gospel truth to my daughter-in-law. What exactly does Maggie think I need an intervention for? Buying real estate with my own money, for making major life decisions without consulting family, for isolating yourself from the people who care about you, for spending money recklessly when you should be planning for your future care needs. I almost laughed. Future care needs, as if I was one step away from assisted living, instead of a healthy 64-year-old woman with excellent health care and enough money to hire live-in help if I ever needed it. "Susan, let me ask you something. When you and Robert bought your Florida condo, did you ask anyone's permission?" "That's different. Robert and I discussed it together." "And I discussed this with myself extensively. I'm not married, Susan. I don't need anyone's permission to spend my own money." The second call came from my nephew Jake. Susan's oldest son. Aunt Carol, Mom asked me to check on you. Are you feeling okay? I'm feeling fantastic, Jake. How are you? I'm confused. Honestly, this house thing doesn't seem like something you'd do. There was that phrase again, not something I do, as if everyone had decided exactly who Carol Anderson was allowed to be. And any deviation from their expectations was evidence of mental instability. Jake, what do you think I'd do? What kind of person do you think I am? I think you're practical, conservative, someone who thinks things through carefully and doesn't make impulsive decisions. And you think buying this house was impulsive? Well, yeah, kind of. I looked out at my deck where I'd spent the morning reading and drinking coffee while watching boats pass by on the Sound. I've been looking at waterfront properties for 2 years, Jake. I've been planning this purchase for months. The only thing that was impulsive was my timing. Why now, though? Why not wait until summer when you could look at more options? Because I got tired of being forgotten on my own birthday. Because I realized that if I waited for my family's approval to live my life, I'd die waiting. Because sometimes you have to do something dramatic to remind people that you exist. Because I found the perfect house and I could afford it. Sometimes life is that simple. The third call was the one I'd been dreading. Emily calling from Vermont with Maggie undoubtedly listening in the background. Mom Anderson, we need to talk. Hello, Emily. How's the extended vacation going? It's not a vacation anymore. We stayed because we're concerned about you. Maggie thinks this house purchase might be a sign of cognitive decline. Maggie thinks again. And what do you think, Emily? There was a pause. I think you're acting very unlike yourself. Maybe that's the point. What's that supposed to mean? Maybe I got tired of being myself as you've all defined me. Maybe I wanted to see what would happen if I acted like someone with agency and financial independence instead of someone's elderly mother who needs constant supervision. Nobody's supervising you. David monitors my bank accounts. You and he make plans for family events without asking what I want to do. Maggie gives advice about my life decisions as if she has any say in them. If that's not supervision, what is it? Another pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Maggie no doubt coaching Emily on what to say next. We're worried about you making decisions this big without thinking them through properly. Emily, I'm a grown woman with a graduate degree and 30 years of business experience. I think I can handle buying a house. A $3.2 million house. Mom Anderson, that's not just any house. No, it's not. It's the house I wanted and I could afford it, so I bought it. Just like you and David bought your house because you wanted it and could afford it. That's different. We're younger. We have income. We consulted with financial advisors. I have income too. Quite a bit of it, actually. And I did consult with a financial advisor myself. The conversation went downhill from there. Emily became increasingly agitated, clearly frustrated that her usual methods of managing me weren't working. By the time we hung up, she'd announced that she and Maggie were cutting their vacation short to come have a proper conversation about my living situation. The fourth call came from David, obviously having been briefed by Emily. Mom, I think we need to sit down as a family and discuss this situation. What situation? The one where I bought a house I love with money I earned. The situation where you made a major life decision without considering how it affects the rest of us. And there it was, the real issue. Not that I'd made a poor decision, but that I'd made a decision that affected their plans for managing my life. David, how does my living in a beautiful waterfront home affect you negatively? It doesn't, but it's not about the house, Mom. It's about the pattern of behavior, the secretiveness about the inheritance, the impulsive purchase, the way you're shutting us out of important decisions. I'm not shutting you out of anything. I'm just not asking your permission to live my life. That's not what this is about, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're all upset that I stopped asking for approval before making choices about my own life. By the time I finished returning all the calls, messages, and texts, it was after 9:00 p.m. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my deck, listening to the gentle sound of waves against the shore. My family was in full crisis mode over my decision to buy a house. Not because the house was a bad investment or because I couldn't afford it, but because I dared to make the decision independently. Because I'd stopped accepting the role of dependent elderly relative who needed their guidance and protection. Tomorrow, Emily and Maggie would arrive full of righteous indignation and careful explanations of why I needed to reconsider my choices. They'd probably bring real estate listings for more appropriate housing options. They might even suggest that my judgment was compromised and that I needed more family oversight, not less. But tonight, I was sitting in my own home on my own deck, drinking my own wine and making my own plans. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again, the real Carol Anderson. Not someone's mother, not someone's burden, not someone's responsibility to manage, just me. Monday morning brought the invasion I'd been expecting. Emily and Maggie Warren arrived at my front door at exactly 8:00 a.m., armed with a folder of real estate listings, a stack of financial planning brochures, and expressions of deep maternal concern that didn't quite hide the underlying irritation. Maggie took one look at my marble foyer and sniffed. "Well, it certainly is large." "Good morning to you too, Maggie. Emily, come in. I'll put on coffee." They followed me into the kitchen like a delegation from the Department of Poor Life Choices. Maggie's sharp eyes were already cataloging everything she'd use against me later. The expensive appliances, the imported tile, the view that probably cost more than she made in a year. "Carol!" Maggie began settling herself at my kitchen island like she was conducting an intervention. "We need to discuss what's really going on here." "What's going on is that I bought a house. Would you like cream in your coffee?" "Don't be glib." Maggie opened her folder and pulled out what looked like a carefully prepared presentation. "This purchase represents several concerning patterns of behavior that Emily and I have been discussing." Emily and I have been discussing. Of course they had. My daughter-in-law and her mother had been analyzing my mental state like I was a case study in geriatric psychology. "What patterns would those be?" Emily jumped in, clearly rehearsed. "Secretiveness about major financial changes, impulsive decision-making, social withdrawal from family activities, and now this purchase that frankly seems designed to prove something rather than meet any actual housing needs. Interesting theory." "What exactly do you think I'm trying to prove?" Maggie leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she probably used with difficult insurance customers. "That you don't need family input on major decisions, that you're still capable of managing complex financial transactions, that you're not ready for the kind of guided living situation that would be more appropriate for someone your age." Guided living situation? I almost choked on my coffee. Is that what we're calling assisted living now? "We're not talking about assisted living," Emily said quickly. "We're talking about age-appropriate housing with built-in community support systems." I looked at the brochures she'd spread across my counter. "Sunnybrook Senior Living, Golden Years, Community Heritage Oaks Retirement Village." All featuring photos of silver-haired people playing board games and doing gentle yoga. These are all senior communities, Emily. They're active adult communities with excellent amenities and healthcare partnerships. Maggie looked at several options before we came here today. Maggie looked at several options without consulting me, of course, because clearly Maggie Warren was now in charge of my housing decisions. How thoughtful of Maggie to research my living situation. I wasn't aware that was her responsibility. Maggie's smile grew tighter. "Carol, I've been watching this family struggle with these decisions for months. David is worried sick about your judgment. Emily is exhausted from trying to balance her own family responsibilities with concern for your welfare. Something needs to change." "You're absolutely right. Something does need to change." They both perked up, clearly thinking they'd made progress. What needs to change is this assumption that I require management by committee. I'm 64 years old, not 94. I have an advanced degree business experience and more money than most people dream of. I don't need Maggie Warren to research my housing options. Maggie's facade of maternal concern cracked slightly. Someone needs to provide some perspective on these decisions. You're obviously not thinking clearly. Because I bought a house you wouldn't have chosen for me. Because you bought a house that costs more than most people make in a lifetime without discussing it with anyone who cares about you. I discussed it with the person whose opinion matters most. Me. Emily tried a different approach, her voice softer now. Mom Anderson, we're not trying to control you. We're trying to support you, but these recent changes, they're concerning. The secrecy about Aunt Grace's inheritance, this house, purchased the way you've been pulling away from family activities. Pulling away from family activities. Emily, when was the last time I was invited to a family activity that wasn't built around someone else's convenience? We invite you to everything. You invite me to events after you've planned them at times that work for your schedule with activities you've chosen. When was the last time anyone asked what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go? Neither of them answered. Let me save you some time with your research, Maggie. I'm not moving into a senior community. I'm not accepting oversight of my financial decisions, and I'm not going to pretend that this conversation is about my welfare when it's really about your discomfort with my independence. Maggie's pretense of concern finally dropped entirely. Your independence, Carol, you're being selfish and irresponsible. You have family members who depend on you, who have built their lives around certain expectations. What expectations? That you'll be a reasonable, reliable presence in their lives. That you'll make decisions that consider their needs and feelings, that you'll act like the mature adult they need you to be, instead of some rebellious teenager buying sports cars and getting tattoos. I almost laughed at the image of me as a rebellious teenager. Maggie, I bought a house with my own money. How exactly does that affect your needs and feelings? It affects our ability to plan for the future, to know that you're safely settled, and not making impulsive decisions that could impact everyone. And there it was, the real issue. Not my safety or my welfare, but their need to control my choices so they could predict my role in their lives. I see. So this is about your comfort, not mine. Emily jumped back in, sensing that Maggie had revealed too much. It's about family, Mom Anderson. Families make decisions together. They consider each other's feelings. They don't just disappear for weekends and come back having bought million-dollar properties. Emily, when you and David bought your house, did you ask my opinion? That's different. How? Because you're our parent. We look to you for stability and consistency. And I've given you both of those things for your entire adult lives. But stability doesn't mean I never change. And consistency doesn't mean I never grow. I'm not a piece of furniture, Emily. I'm a person with my own dreams and goals. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Maggie gathered her brochures and stood up. Well, Carol, I can see that you're determined to make this mistake. But when this house becomes too much to manage, when the isolation gets to you, when you realize that independence isn't the same thing as happiness, don't expect the family to just pick up the pieces. I wouldn't dream of it, Maggie. After they left, I sat in my beautiful kitchen, looking out at my beautiful view, thinking about Maggie's words. She was probably right that independence wasn't the same thing as happiness. But for the first time in years, I had the chance to find out what my version of happiness actually looked like. And that was worth more than all the family approval in the world. 2 weeks after Maggie's intervention attempt, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation. I was cleaning out Robert Sr.'s old desk, finally ready to tackle the paperwork I'd avoided for 3 years, when I found a manila folder tucked behind the warranty information for appliances we no longer owned. The tab was labeled David Private in my late husband's careful handwriting. Inside were bank statements, loan applications, and correspondence that painted a very different picture of my son's financial stability than the one he'd been presenting to me. David owed $47,000 in credit card debt. His mortgage was 3 months behind. And most shocking of all, he'd taken out a second mortgage on his house using me as a co-signer, forging my signature on documents dated just 2 months after Robert Sr.'s funeral. I sat in Robert Sr.'s old chair, staring at the evidence of my son's deception, feeling like I was looking at a stranger's life. The David I knew was responsible, conservative, with money, someone who'd inherited his father's careful approach to finances. This David was desperate, reckless, and apparently willing to commit fraud to solve his problems. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was the dates. Every single financial crisis in these documents coincided with one of Maggie Warren's mysterious health emergencies. Every rushed trip to Vermont. Every canceled birthday celebration. Every family event that had been postponed or moved to accommodate Maggie's needs had happened during months when David's financial situation was deteriorating. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus Reed, Aunt Grace's lawyer, who'd handled my inheritance. "Marcus, I need you to run a credit check on my name. I think someone may have been using my identity for loan applications." 3 hours later, I had the full picture. Not only had David forged my signature on his second mortgage, but he'd also applied for 2 credit cards in my name and taken out a personal loan using my Social Security number. My credit score, which I hadn't checked in years, had dropped from excellent to barely acceptable. The doorbell rang as I was reviewing the credit report. Through the window, I could see a silver BMW in my driveway, Emily's car. She stood on my porch looking nervous, clutching a small gift bag. "Mom Anderson, I hope I'm not interrupting. I brought you something from Vermont, a peace offering." I let her in, curious about this sudden change in tactics. She handed me the bag with an awkward smile. Inside was a snow globe featuring a charming Vermont inn and a card that read, "Thinking of you, Maggie. Maggie asked me to give you this. She feels bad about how things went the other day." How thoughtful of Maggie to think of me. I set the snow globe on the entry table. "Would you like some coffee?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about the house situation, but also about other things." We settled in the living room. Emily perched on the edge of my new sofa like she was ready to bolt at any moment. "Mom Anderson, I owe you an apology. Maggie and we may have overreacted about the house purchase." "May have did overreact. It's just that David has been so stressed lately. And when you bought this place without telling him, he kind of fell apart." "Stressed about what?" Emily's carefully composed expression flickered. "Work stuff. The usual pressures. You know how he is about money." I did know how he was about money. Apparently better than I'd thought. "Emily, how long have you known about David's financial problems?" The color drained from her face. "What financial problems?" "The credit card debt, the mortgage issues, the loans he's taken out using my name without my permission." I don't know what you're talking about." But her expression told a different story. Emily knew exactly what I was talking about. The forged signatures. Emily, the identity theft. The fact that every one of Maggie's health emergencies seems to coincide with David needing to avoid conversations about money. Emily's composure cracked entirely. He didn't mean for it to go this far. It started small, just 1 credit card to get through a rough patch. Then Maggie really did get sick. And the medical bills. What medical bills? Maggie has excellent insurance. Not for the treatments she needed, the experimental therapies, the private specialists. David felt responsible because she's been so good to our family. I stared at my daughter-in-law. Pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Emily, exactly how much money has David given to Maggie Warren?" "It's not like that. It's not giving, it's investing." "Investing in what?" "Maggie has connections in the medical research field. She's been helping David invest in some promising treatments for her condition. When they pay off, we'll make back everything we've put in plus returns. My blood went cold. Emily Maggie Warren doesn't have connections in medical research. She was an office manager at an insurance company before she retired. No, that's not. She has friends who work in pharmaceutical development. She's shown us the research papers, the projected returns. She's shown you fake documents to convince David to give her money. He doesn't have money. He's stolen from me to give to her. Emily stood up abruptly. That's not true. Maggie would never. She's been like a mother to me. A mother who's convinced you to enable your husband's financial crimes. Emily David has committed identity theft. He's forged legal documents. He's destroyed my credit rating to fund Maggie's lifestyle. You're wrong, but her voice was shaking now. Maggie wouldn't do that. She cares about our family. Maggie Warren has been systematically draining your family's resources for years while positioning herself as your savior. Every emergency, every crisis, every desperate need for funds has been carefully orchestrated. Emily backed toward the door. I have to go. This conversation? You're not thinking clearly. The stress of the move, the isolation from family. Emily, wait. But she was already gone, leaving behind the snow globe and a growing certainty that my family's problems ran much deeper than I'd imagined. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Reed again. Marcus, I need you to investigate someone for me. Maggie Warren, age approximately 70, last known address in Vermont. I want to know everything about her financial history, her family connections, and any legal issues in her background. May I ask why? Because I think she's been running a long-term con on my family, and my son has been stealing from me to finance it. 2 hours later, Marcus called back with information that made me feel sick. Maggie Warren wasn't Maggie Warren at all. Maggie Warren was actually Maggie Wells, and she had a criminal history spanning 3 states and 20 years. Marcus's research revealed a pattern that was as impressive as it was terrifying. Maggie had been targeting families with aging parents and financial resources since the early 2000s. Her method was always the same. Befriend a younger woman with family money, gradually position herself as an indispensable maternal figure, then create ongoing medical or financial crises that required increasingly large investments or loans. She'd been arrested twice, Marcus told me over the phone. Once in Florida in 2018 for elder fraud, once in North Carolina in 2015 for insurance fraud. Both cases were dismissed due to insufficient evidence or plea agreements. What about her relationship with Emily and David? How long has this been going on? Based on the financial records you gave me, the first loan your son took out was in September 2019. That's also when the first Maggie Wells medical emergency appeared on your family calendar. 4 years. Maggie had been systematically destroying my son's financial life for 4 years, and I'd been so busy feeling sorry for myself about forgotten birthdays that I'd missed it entirely. Marcus, I need to know how much total money David has given her. Based on the loan documents and credit statements, approximately $180,000. But Carol, there's something else you need to know. My heart sank. What? Maggie Wells isn't working alone. She has a partner, someone who helps her identify and research target families, someone with access to personal information and family dynamics. I'm still working on that. But whoever it is, they've been feeding her detailed information about your family's financial situation, your personality, your relationship with David and Emily. This wasn't a random targeting. This was carefully planned. After I hung up, I sat in my beautiful living room, looking out at the water, trying to process what I'd learned. My son was a victim, not a villain. He'd been manipulated by a professional con artist who'd spent years positioning herself as a trusted family member. But that didn't excuse the identity theft, the forged documents, the lies. The real question was who was helping Maggie access our family's private information. My phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? It's important. What's wrong? I can't explain over the phone. Please, just come and don't bring anyone else. 20 minutes later, I stood in David and Emily's living room, looking at my son's haggard face and wondering how I'd missed the signs of his distress. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for it." "Try me." "I've been taking money from your accounts, forging your signature on loan documents, using your credit without permission." I sat down heavily on their sofa. "How much, David?" "Everything. The mortgage, the credit cards, the personal loans. About $180,000 total." "Why?" He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "Maggie needed help with her medical treatments, experimental therapies that her insurance wouldn't cover. She showed me the research, the projected outcomes. It was supposed to be temporary, just until her insurance appeals went through." "David, Maggie Warren isn't who she says she is." He looked up confused. "What do you mean?" I told him everything Marcus had discovered. The fake identity, the criminal history, the pattern of targeting families like ours. David's face grew paler with each revelation. "That's impossible. Maggie has been part of our family for years. She introduced me and Emily. She's the one who encouraged Emily to pursue her graduate degree. She's been at every birthday, every holiday. She introduced you and Emily at a conference for financial planners. Emily was there representing her company, and Maggie introduced us because she thought we'd hit it off." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "David, what kind of conference?" "Estate planning and senior financial services. Maggie said she was there as a consultant." "Did you meet Emily before or after Dad's diagnosis?" "Right before." "Why?" "Oh, God!" David's face went white. "You think Maggie targeted our family because of Dad's illness?" "I think Maggie researched our family thoroughly before she arranged for you to meet Emily. She knew Dad was dying, knew I'd be inheriting money, knew you'd be in a position to access my finances after Dad passed." David stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "Emily doesn't know. She can't know. She genuinely cares about Maggie, trusts her completely. Or Emily is working with her." "No." David spun around. "Mom, you can't think that. Emily loves me. She loves our life together." "David, how much does Emily know about your financial situation?" "She knows we've been helping Maggie with medical expenses. She doesn't know about the loans, the forged documents, the identity theft. She doesn't know, or she's pretending not to know." We were interrupted by the sound of Emily's car in the driveway. David looked panicked. "Don't tell her we talked about this. Not yet. I need time to figure out how to explain everything." "David, we don't have time. Maggie is running a sophisticated con operation, and Emily might be part of it." "She's not part of it. She can't be." The front door opened, and Emily walked in carrying shopping bags and wearing a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom Anderson, I didn't know you were coming over. How nice." She looked nervous. I realized more nervous than someone should be about an unexpected visit from their mother-in-law. "Hello, Emily. David and I were just having a conversation about family finances." "Oh." Her smile faltered slightly. "Nothing serious, I hope." "Actually, quite serious. We were discussing Maggie's medical expenses and how they've been impacting your budget." Emily glanced at David, who was staring at her with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Maggie's been going through a difficult time," Emily said carefully. "We're just trying to be supportive. Of course, it's wonderful that you've been able to help her with the experimental treatments. The treatments are showing real promise. Maggie says the doctors are very optimistic." "Which doctors are those exactly?" Another glance at David. I don't remember their names. Maggie handles all the medical appointments and the research facility where she's receiving treatment. It's in Boston, I think, or maybe Burlington. Maggie drives herself to most appointments." Every answer was vague, evasive, designed to end the conversation rather than provide information. I looked at my son, hoping he was finally seeing what I was seeing. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through Emily's social media accounts with the methodical attention of a private investigator. What I found made my blood run cold. Emily's Instagram showed 5 years of happy family photos. But when I looked closely at the timeline, something was wrong. The earliest photos of her and David together were dated October 2019, but they claimed to have met at a conference in June 2018. Where were the photos from their early relationship, the casual dating pictures, the getting-to-know-you moments? Instead, their social media history began abruptly with photos that looked like they were already an established couple. Family dinners with Maggie prominently featured. Holiday celebrations where Maggie was clearly the center of attention. Wedding planning photos where Maggie was more involved than the actual mothers of the bride and groom. I scrolled through Maggie's Facebook page next. Her profile claimed she had lived in Vermont her entire life, but her tagged locations told a different story. Photos from Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia all within the past 10 years. Always with different families, always positioned as a beloved family friend or adopted grandmother. In one album labeled My Florida Family, Maggie was celebrating Christmas with a couple and their teenage daughter. She was wearing the same necklace she'd worn to David and Emily's wedding. In another album from North Carolina, she was at a graduation party surrounded by young adults who called her Grandma Maggie in the photo comments. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Maggie inserted herself into families became indispensable, then slowly drained their resources before moving on to the next victims. But Emily's role in this was still unclear to me. Was she a victim like David, or was she Maggie's partner in crime? The answer came at 11:30 p.m. when my security system alerted me that someone was in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Emily's car parked at the bottom of my drive, with the engine running and the headlights off. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, clearly having a phone conversation. Then she got out and walked around the side of my house toward the deck. I watched from the darkness of my living room as she tried the sliding door that led from my deck into the kitchen. When it didn't open, she pulled out her phone and made another call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but her body language was agitated, frustrated. After 10 minutes, she returned to her car and drove away. The next morning, I called Marcus Reed. Marcus, I need you to run a background check on Emily Mitchell. That was her maiden name before she married David. Any particular reason? I think she might be working with Maggie Warren. I need to know if Emily is who she claims to be. The results came back within hours, and they confirmed my worst fears. Emily Mitchell had never worked for the financial services company she claimed to represent. The university degree she'd shown David was fake. Her employment history was fabricated. Even her age was a lie. She was actually 38, not 32, as she'd told David. Most damning of all, Emily Mitchell had been living in North Carolina in 2015, in the same city where Maggie Warren had been arrested for insurance fraud. Carol, Marcus said when he called with the results. I think your daughter-in-law is Maggie Warren's daughter. The room seemed to tilt. Her daughter. Maggie Warren has a daughter named Emily Warren, born in 1985. The physical description matches your daughter-in-law perfectly. They've been working together for at least 8 years, possibly longer. I sat down hard on my kitchen stool, staring out at the water, while my world rearranged itself around this new information. David hadn't been targeted randomly. He'd been hunted by 2 professional con artists who'd spent months, or maybe years, researching our family, identifying our vulnerabilities, and positioning themselves to maximize their access to our resources. The woman he'd fallen in love with, married, and built a life with was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, she was a predator who'd been systematically destroying his financial future while pretending to love him. My phone rang. David's name on the screen. Mom, something's wrong. Emily left early this morning and hasn't come back. She's not answering her phone. I found some papers in her dresser drawer, and I think I need to show them to you. What kind of papers? Bank account statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Credit reports with my name on them for debts I never authorized. And photos, Mom, photos of our house, our cars, documents from Dad's estate. It looks like she's been documenting everything. David, don't touch anything else. Don't move those papers. Don't call Emily. Don't do anything until I get there. Mom, what's happening? What's going on? I'll explain everything when I see you. But David, you need to prepare yourself. Emily isn't who you think she is. When I arrived at David's house, he met me at the door, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. In his hand was a manila folder filled with evidence that Emily had been systematically documenting our family's assets, habits, and vulnerabilities for years. Bank statements showing regular transfers to accounts in Maggie's name. Photos of insurance documents, investment statements, and legal paperwork. Even pictures of me at family gatherings annotated with notes about my personality, my relationship with David, and my potential access to family resources. But the most chilling item was a handwritten letter in Emily's neat cursive. Mom, the Anderson situation is working better than we planned. David trusts me completely and still has no idea about the loans. His mother is more suspicious than we anticipated, but her recent house purchase suggests she has significant hidden assets. We need to accelerate the timeline before she starts asking too many questions. The inheritance from the aunt was larger than we estimated. If we can get access to those funds, this will be our biggest score yet. David read the letter with shaking hands. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes full of betrayal and pain. She never loved me. No, sweetheart, I don't think she did. Our entire marriage was a lie. I'm afraid so. He crumpled the letter and threw it across the room. How could I be so stupid? How could I not see this? Because you're a good person who trusted someone you loved. That's not stupid, David. That's human. What do we do now? Now we fight back. The next morning, I called Detective Lisa Rodriguez from the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Rodriguez, I need to report an ongoing fraud scheme involving identity theft, forged documents, and what I believe is a mother-daughter con artist team. Within 2 hours, she was sitting in my living room, reviewing the evidence Marcus had compiled and the documents David had found in Emily's dresser. Mrs. Anderson, this is quite an operation they've been running. The level of planning and documentation suggests they've done this before, probably multiple times. My lawyer found evidence of similar schemes in Florida and North Carolina. We'll coordinate with those jurisdictions. But first, I need to ask, do you know where Emily and Maggie are right now? Emily disappeared yesterday morning. Maggie is supposedly in Vermont, but I doubt that's true. Detective Rodriguez made notes on her tablet. We'll need to move quickly. If they suspect they've been discovered, they'll try to liquidate whatever assets they can access and disappear. That afternoon, David and I met with our bank to freeze all accounts and reverse any unauthorized transactions we could prove were fraudulent. The process was complicated by the fact that David had legitimately signed some documents, even though he'd been deceived about their purpose. Mr. Anderson, the bank manager explained, some of these transactions will be difficult to reverse because you did authorize them even if you were misled about why the money was needed. How much can we recover? I asked. Probably about 60% of the fraudulent charges. The rest? Well, it depends on whether we can locate the perpetrators and recover assets. David looked defeated. So, I've lost over $70,000 permanently. Possibly. But Mrs. Anderson, there's something else you should know. Someone attempted to access your accounts yesterday using forged power of attorney documents. My blood ran cold. What kind of access? They tried to transfer $2.3 million from your investment account to an offshore banking account. Our fraud protection systems flagged the transaction, but it was a sophisticated attempt. Detective Rodriguez looked up from her notes. They're accelerating their timeline. This suggests they know they've been discovered, and they're trying to grab as much as they can before they run. That evening, as I sat in my villa watching the sunset over Long Island Sound, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Carol? Maggie's voice was calm, almost conversational. Maggie, or should I call you Maggie Warren? A soft laugh. You've been busy. I'm impressed. Most of our families never figure it out until it's too late. Most of your families. How many people have you done this to? Does it matter? What matters is that you and I need to have a conversation. I don't think we do. Oh, but we do. You see, Carol, you've created a problem for me. The police involvement, the frozen accounts, the investigation. That's going to make things difficult for Emily and me. Good. Not good, actually, because here's what you need to understand. I know things about your family that you don't. Things that could be very embarrassing if they became public. My heart started racing. What kind of things? Your late husband's business dealings, for instance. Some very questionable tax strategies. Some partnerships that weren't entirely legal. Would you like me to share those details with the IRS? Or perhaps with the local newspaper? You're bluffing. Am I? Carol, did you ever wonder why your husband left you such a large estate? Did you ever ask where all that money came from? I felt sick. My husband was an honest businessman. Your husband was a tax evader who used shell companies to hide income for 15 years. I have documentation that would destroy his reputation and probably result in significant tax penalties for his estate. Your estate. Carol. The room was spinning. What do you want? I want you to call off the investigation. I want the frozen accounts released, and I want a cashier's check for $3 million as a gesture of goodwill. Or I release information that will destroy your family's reputation and probably land your son in prison as an accessory to his father's crimes. David doesn't know anything about his father's business. Doesn't he? He signed a lot of documents over the years, Carol. Power of attorney forms, investment authorizations, tax papers. If I can prove he knew about the illegal activities, he becomes criminally liable. My hands were shaking. You planned this from the beginning. I plan everything, Carol. That's why I'm good at what I do. And if I pay you, then Emily and I disappear and your family secrets stay buried. Everyone wins. I need time to think. You have 24 hours. I'll call you tomorrow evening with wire transfer instructions. After she hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, trying to decide what kind of woman I was. The old Carol would have paid, would have protected her family's reputation at any cost, would have sacrificed herself to keep David safe. But the new Carol, the one who'd bought a $3.2 million villa and discovered her own strength, had a different idea. I called Detective Rodriguez. Detective, I just received a blackmail demand from Maggie Warren. I think it's time to set a trap. The trap we set was elegant in its simplicity. Detective Rodriguez arranged for me to wear a recording device during Maggie's final call. We also set up surveillance at 3 locations where Maggie might try to collect the money she demanded. But first, I had to have the hardest conversation of my life with my son. David, there are some things about your father's business that I need to tell you. We sat in my living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, while I explained about Dad's tax evasion, the shell companies, and the questionable business practices that had built our family's wealth. I found out about it 2 years before he died. I told David, and he was terrified that the IRS would discover the hidden income, that we'd lose everything. He spent the last years of his life trying to legitimize the money through careful investments and charitable donations. David was quiet for a long time. Did you know when you were married to him? Not until the end. I handled some of the business paperwork, but he kept the illegal activities separate from the legitimate business. I signed documents without understanding what they really meant, like I did with Emily. Exactly like that. Are we going to prison, Mom? I don't know, but I'm not paying blackmail money to find out. Whatever consequences we face, we'll face them honestly. That evening, Maggie called exactly on schedule. With Detective Rodriguez listening from another room and recording equipment capturing every word, I let Maggie lay out her demands one final time. Have you made your decision, Carol? I have. The answer is no. Silence on the other end. Then, I don't think you understand the consequences. I understand them perfectly. You're going to release information about my husband's tax evasion. You're going to try to implicate David in crimes he didn't commit. You might succeed in destroying our reputation and costing us a lot of money. Then why are you refusing to pay? Because I'm done being afraid, Maggie. I'm done letting people control me with threats and manipulation. If my husband broke the law, then there will be consequences. If David and I have to face financial penalties or even criminal charges, then we'll face them. But I will not give you one more dollar to maintain the illusion that my life is perfect. You're making a mistake, Carol. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. You'll regret this. I doubt it. You see, Maggie, you made one critical error in your assessment of my family. What's that? You assumed that I cared more about protecting my reputation than protecting my dignity. You were wrong. I hung up. Within hours, Maggie made good on her threats. The local newspaper received an anonymous package containing documentation of Dad's business irregularities. The IRS received copies of the same information. David and I spent the next week meeting with lawyers, accountants, and tax specialists. The damage was significant. I had to pay $1.8 million in back taxes and penalties. David faced potential criminal charges for signing documents related to the illegal activities, though his lawyer was confident that his lack of knowledge would protect him from prosecution. But something unexpected happened during those terrible weeks of legal meetings and financial reckonings. David and I grew closer than we had in years. Without the weight of secrets between us, without Maggie and Emily's manipulation, we rediscovered the relationship we had lost after Robert passed away. I'm sorry, Mom, David said one evening as we sat on the deck watching the sunset. For everything, the identity theft, the lies, the way I treated you like you couldn't handle your own affairs. I'm sorry, too, for keeping secrets about your father's business, for letting you struggle with Emily's manipulation without realizing what was happening. Do you think we'll get through this? I know we will. We might be poorer and certainly wiser, but we'll get through it. 3 months later, Detective Lisa Rodriguez called with news about Maggie and Emily. We found them in Mexico, she said. They had been running the same scam on a wealthy family in Guadalajara. The Mexican authorities arrested them, and they will be extradited to face charges here. What charges? Wire fraud, identity theft, extortion, conspiracy. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. And the money? We recovered about $400,000 from various accounts. Not everything, but it's something. David slowly began to rebuild his life. The divorce was finalized without contest as Emily couldn't appear in court due to fighting extradition. He sold the house full of painful memories and bought a smaller place closer to my villa. I kept the waterfront property not because I needed all that space, but because it represented something important the moment I stopped apologizing for taking up room in my own life. Now, a year later, I wake up every morning in my beautiful bedroom overlooking Long Island Sound, and I think about the lessons I learned from Maggie Warren and Emily Warren. They taught me that some people will see kindness as weakness, generosity as stupidity, and love as an opportunity for exploitation. They showed me that the people closest to us can sometimes hurt us the most. Not because they hate us, but because they've learned to see us as resources rather than people. But most importantly, they taught me that dignity isn't something you can buy or protect by avoiding conflict. Dignity is something you claim by refusing to let others define your worth, your capabilities, or your choices. I am 65 now. David visits twice a week, and we're building a relationship based on honesty rather than assumptions. I've started traveling, taking art classes, and making friends who see me as Carol, not someone's mother, widow, or responsibility. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's simply refusing to stay small in a world that keeps trying to shrink you. The villa purchase that started this whole mess wasn't really about the house. It was about claiming space, demanding attention, and insisting on my right to exist as a complete person rather than a convenient afterthought. And thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.